Okay, just to welcome everybody here. Thanks everybody for joining. This is a session where we first of all want to acknowledge country that we're on. So thanks so much to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, as well as the Burra people of the Darug Nation, and for the warm welcome yesterday. We've got a panel of 4 people today. Farheen Karam will be facilitating the session. She's the Regional Manager for Asia for DT Global. Her colleague, Danica Blackrock, will give us a perspective from her program Participa in Timor-Leste. So that's working on infrastructure, village level infrastructure. We've got 2 colleagues online. Grace Hioa will be bringing a perspective from PNG, where she's working on the basic community engagement, building community engagement program in PNG. And they're looking at citizen government engagement. And then we have our colleague Petra Karetsi working in Indonesia on the large-scale Scala program, which is really looking at decentralisation and again, service delivery. So we've got a range of different perspectives and we'll have time for the panel to discuss 3 main questions and then open up to the rest of you. So over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Farida. So we wanted today's discussion to be more like a conversation amongst ourselves, but also with you. So please do pose your questions. Each of our panelists come from different programs, from different regions, different implementation experience. And so we want to hear from them how MEL has evolved. We know in this changing context, MEL has adapted. It has become, sometimes it was quite technical, sometimes siloed, to more adaptive. And we want to hear more of that. But before we start, I wanted to give the panelists ask them to talk a little bit about their programs, because that would set the context to how MEL is functioning for them. So I'll start off with Petra, who is online and dialing in from Indonesia. Over to you, Petra.
Hey, Farheen. Thank you, everybody. As in the introduction, the program that I have the privilege of being the team leader is called Scala. It's managed through DT Global and funded by DFAT. It's planned to be an 8-year program, and we're coming to the end of the first phase, which is by 2026. So we'll be facing a midterm review soon, which really requires the evidence of our MEL to get to be able to receive approval to progress into a second phase. The program essentially looks at addressing the needs of services for vulnerable communities from a GETSI perspective, so women and children, the elderly, people with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups in 10 provinces where we're working in, which stretch across Indonesia from Aceh to Papua. The total number of population within these 10 provinces is around 26 million people. And we are working based on a agreed results framework between the government of Australia and government of Indonesia, which has set out 3 end of program outcomes for us. The first is ensuring or strengthening the enabling environment for service delivery in local government. So that's working with central government. The second end of program outcome looks at how to work with local governments in strengthening their actual service delivery from a governance perspective in terms of their budgeting and planning. And then the third end of program outcome looks at building the voice and influence of vulnerable groups in ensuring their service needs are met. So I'll stop there and hope that's a sufficiently succinct but clear a description of the program that we're working on at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Over to you, Grace, if you can give us a little more background of your program in PNG.
Thanks. So my name is Grace Hawa, and I'm the Monitoring Evaluation Research lead in the program. The program is funded by DFED. It's a 4-year program with a likely extension for the next 4 years. We're in the final year of the first 4-year phase. So it's a governance program, and we work across civil society, churches, and the government of PNG for better service delivery. And our three-end of program outcomes look at organizational capacity strengthening. We look at JETSI transformative practices, and then also collaboration among our partners to solve development problems. So those are the kind of three main end of program outcomes that we are working towards. Thanks.
Thank you, Grace. And over to you, Danica.
Thank you. My name is Danica Blacklock. I'm the MEL manager for the Participant Program. It's the largest DFAT program in Timor-Leste. It's a $100 million local or municipal government strengthening and rural infrastructure service delivery program. We have three broad end of program outcomes, working first at national level at the enabling environment to deliver subnational services. And the second outcome focuses on municipal capacities to deliver services at the village level. And a third outcome, which is under review at the moment, focuses specifically on subnational roads. And we're looking to integrate that outcome into the other two outcomes going forward. We're in the last year of phase one, and we will be entering the second 5-year phase in middle of next year.
Thank you, Danica. So now for today's topic, MEL in a complex environment. We know that change is never linear. It's it never follows a straight line. But here we are in a contract context. We have to have set frameworks, log frames, neat indicators, show results. Yet we are pulled into scenario planning, doing adaptive management. And so we are in a constant state of flux, and MEL needs to be adaptive. So the big challenge that we face is to navigate those changes. The question for today's panelist is, how do you navigate between delivering those results and outputs that is set in a contract, but linking it to meaningful change and meaningful outcomes? So I'll start with you, Petra, online.
Okay. Wow. Well, first, I think that's the importance of the design process as well, right? So the linear processes that have been determined by agreement between the government of Australia and Indonesia also went through a consultative process, and so sufficiently clear, but also, let's say, sufficiently vague in order to be able to adapt to changes of context and conditions that we face, particularly when the design process was happening, where we were looking towards general elections, both at national and subnational level. So part of it was actually incorporating a lot of possible changes and requirements into the risk matrix that also formed a large part of the design in saying that we will have to be able to adapt and link our results with emerging contexts and conditions. The other aspect was also then determining clear thematic areas of work that would fit in and feed into these larger results areas. And so for us, we configured that into 4 thematic areas, particularly, and this was particularly important because we're working across 3 ministries and 25 directorates as partners in the partners in the program. And so how do you link their agendas and their making sure their demands can be sufficiently incorporated, but guided also by the framework that has been established by DFAT and Government of Indonesia. So yeah, I think it starts very much from the design process, and then incorporating likely changes or possible risks to the program and how they might impact on the results progressing from the program through a very robust risk assessment process as well.
Thanks, Petra. Grace, did you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I think with results, results don't come overnight, and we should be aware of that. And Petra is right. Context is really important. And having to work with our partners, identify the kind of change they want to see at the very start. So we have had to work with our partners, building their skills around the type of change they want to see over the design period or over the implementation phase. What are the type of results they want to see? So the whole program logic, the planning around MEL, the types of data to collect, and then having to go into the mentoring, coaching, and collecting that evidence to demonstrate that, yes, we are making progress and we are collecting evidence to demonstrate that we are heading towards the right direction. Sometimes it's not easy, and context does play a part. What is the political economy analysis saying? What are the changes that we are seeing? How can we adapt? So that's where adaptive management comes in as well. Thanks.
I'm not sure how much more meaningful I can add to what they've already said, but I guess my experience around this is, you know, you're also balancing the expectations of results from two different stakeholder groups. You've got, especially as a contractor, right? You've got your donor who has a very sort of clearly outlined types of results or outcomes they want to see. And then you have your partner governments. If you're working with government, in Grace's case, they have other types of stakeholders. What are your key stakeholders? What types of change do they want to see? And being able to design MEL systems that can cater to both and be able to deliver the information that they're looking for at certain periods of time, but also to be able to respond quickly when, you know, sometimes we'll have a stakeholder come back and ask us like, but what about this? What about that result that, you know, happened only last week? So how do we have systems that are able to give meaningful information, but also put it into a context of like, this is what the information is telling us right now. But as you know, as time goes on, this might mean something different down the line, or it might be contributing to something that we're not expecting at this point. And so it's being able to have sort of a bit of a toolbox of approaches and tools that we can use to respond to the needs, but also to be able to track those changes and you know, support the risk management and support the adaptive management as context changes as well. So it's quite a being able to sort of look across the spectrum and have the right types of tools in place. And when you don't have the right types of tools, being able to, you know, go out, identify what else do we need, what are we missing, how are we going to collect this information, and also ensuring that the information is continually robust, that we're collecting over time as well.
Thanks, Danica. Talking about tools and templates and all the approaches, I remember, Grace, you mentioned that your program uses Power BI, uses even AI, and there's actually a state-of-the-art MIS system, Umben, thing that you use in your program. Can you tell us a little more of how you've been utilizing those systems to demonstrate these results?
So we have a management information system that we developed. It's been in operation for almost 2 years now. When we designed it, we thought about all of the tools and data that we had to collect, because the program is largely around quantitative data. So we thought about how it was going to be designed in order to be fit for purpose. So that's where we linked in Power BI, all of the entries that we have, and also a little bit of small scale AI for sense making, and to identify instances of change. Because we're so process driven, we tend to input information, and we need that to identify the types of changes that we are making. So that's been a really useful process for us.
Thanks, Grace. Process-driven and tools that cater to that. But we are trying to adapt as we go, and we go with the flow. So what have you been doing or what have Participa has been doing to go with the flow, the changes? We've seen lots of polycrisis. Someone in the room talked about polycrisis yesterday. That includes COVID. Programs have pivoted. So what sort of changes did Participa introduce?
Interestingly, so Participa is, I won't say unique, because everybody had a unique experience during COVID, but Participa was just entering. So Participa is actually a follow-on program from a previous 10-year program, which was a very specific community infrastructure program. And Participa expanded to include the broader portfolio of infrastructure projects funded by DFAT in Timor-Leste, as well as the local government / decentralization support program. So at the time, what happened was the program really pivoted towards supporting COVID response, particularly with vaccines. At the same time, there was also a cyclone resulting in significant flooding, landslides, a lot of infrastructure damage. Many communities in the country were cut off due to inaccessible roads, et cetera. And so the program really, for the first sort of 2 years, was very much a responsive program to the needs of the government and communities in terms of rehabilitating infrastructure, providing vaccine support, and then, of course, then there was elections, and the government changed. And so, and I go back to what Petra was mentioning before, when programs are designed, and then when it comes to implementation. So not only was the program designed, 18 months before it started, and then of course the context changed, but then the context changed like 3 more times in a row. And so what the program started with in 2021 to what we're doing now is substantially different, and yet we're still progressing towards the same outcomes that were there. And when Grace mentioned about being process-driven, we have to continually reevaluate how we work with government and how we're working on how we work with government, what we're working on with government, as well as being able to adapt. We defined change in a certain way 18 months ago, but now we're revisiting that and saying, is that still a relevant way to evaluate or describe the change that we want to see? The new government in Timor-Leste has very different policies than the previous ones. They have very similar development objectives, but the way they want to go about achieving those and the way they define them are also very different. So for us, it's really about having these processes that can follow the pathways that keep emerging, but at the same time creating boundaries using our MEL system of we see teams sort of kind of straying off into certain sort of pathways that aren't necessarily the most effective way to get to the outcomes we want to see, because we get so into the process. So part of our role is to have to be able to take a step back and be continually evaluating, is this the type of information? What is this information telling us? Are we on the right pathway, or are we straying too far outside of these boundaries? And I have to say they're pretty broad boundaries that we've set for ourselves. But sort of otherwise we end up kind of straying to one side because because these crises can take us in different directions, we do have to pivot, but we also need to be able to have the right mechanisms in place to help us pivot back, or pivot not necessarily all the way back because the context has changed. So sometimes we just need to, we need to course correct, perhaps is the better term.
Thanks, Danica. And Petra, did you want to share your insights?
Oh, just that I feel it's very useful also to see how we can combine between ops and in our systems with MEL requirements. So always trying to look for efficiencies that that allow for our systems to help in picking up the data that we need, right? I feel trying to team lead between these different units, often there's a bit of tension between MEL and implementation, and implementation just wants to get on with it, and MEL wants us to hang on, sit back, and ask the so what questions, and so to what extent we can make that more efficient through the systems that we use. That provides prompts for people to make sure that they're recording where they're going, and prompts to remind them to make sure that they're recording where they're going before moving on to the next activity. So really interested. Also, what I love about these sessions is also being able to learn from other programs. So really interested in how Grace is using applying AI, etc. Also in the process. I just wanted to emphasize also that often there's so much expectations on these programs, and you also need to see where the programs are being implemented within the development what do you call it, time frame, where and what are the expectations of is it coming at an early stage where a lot of the approaches and activities are actually piloting and are recognized as just as providing methodological impact, or whether it's actually progressing towards where we have proven approaches that then need to be incorporated into regulations, so having ecosystemic impact, and then whether it's actually impacting on changes in the behavior of, for in our case, in terms of the behaviors of civil servants, and so whether then it has an actual operational impact. And sometimes I think the expectations are towards as if where we're still piloting, and the question is, where has this already made changes in how the government is operating? And so I think that's also really important to be clear at what stage of a development process or a change cycle is the program actually operating. Thanks.
Thanks, Petra. And I think it's a very important part in understanding where are you in the program cycle, and that really varies from one program to another. Petra, you've raised piloting these approaches, which, you know, in early stages, we pilot, we trial it, and then we also have to see whether it succeeds or not. Oftentimes, we don't talk about the failures, but there should be space to also fail and be able to use the learning from it. And I think that's where MEL plays a very important role in sort of repackaging the failures to what success could look like, what could be done differently. So from that perspective, do you have any examples that you can share when you were piloting that you had to change, do the course corrections? But the other angle to this is getting the other side, the other stakeholder group that is very important, and that's our client, the donor agency or DFAT in this instance. How do we then communicate that with DFAT?
That was to me, Fari?
Yes, Petra.
Oh, sorry. Definitely so many examples of pilots that were piloted and then never actually got incorporated or actually then became part of government system, but way beyond the life of the program understanding. And so I'll give you one example is where recently we piloted cash transfers for the elderly in Southwest Papua, and was going very well. Change of governor, new governor said, no, that's that governor's, the previous governor's program. I want a different program. I want it for mothers and children. So part of it is, okay, there's a change in program, and that pilot, let's say, was not successful in terms of sustaining what was already implemented for the elderly, but the processes and the systems were still useful in then designing and progressing the agenda of the new governor, while still also trying to highlight the benefits of the what the previous governor had done. Beyond that, particularly for Scala, because we're building off of over 20 years of DFAT support in the decentralization process. So it's we're looking at more what are the underlying factors that have prevented pilots and new approaches and new innovations to actually be incorporated into the government system. So looking at where there is lack of let's say nomenclature or the budget lines and definitions and designations that would actually provide sufficient flexibility for local governments to actually then be able to program and budget, because there's the budget lines that allow for such programming to be incorporated into their plans, for instance. So that's where we're progressing, utilizing previous programs that were working more at a methodological impact phase and looking very much at the ecosystemic impact, the regulations, the processes, the procedures that would allow in the future various new innovations to be more easily adopted by government.
Thanks, Petra. And Grace, did you want to share any insights to that?
I think not on a pilot, but maybe an approach. So we've been using adaptive management in our programming, and we recently had a review around the adaptive management and around the MEL system and the data that we are collecting and how we are using that for decision making. So the review found that it was a rapid review, found that we were using more of the tacit knowledge to make everyday operational decisions, and not so much of the structured knowledge. And I think that's because of the PNG or Pacific Island oral culture, where we're so used to telling stories, coming together, building consensus, and then making a decision. So with that finding, we were able to tell the client to give them that honest feedback that this approach is new, staff are still getting the hang of it, partners are still using it. So we need to give it a bit more time to be able to actually implement it and use it fully. So it's also about being able to use that information if something's not working for a way forward and see what's going to work, what will not work, and not just say something has failed and not do anything about it.
Thanks, Grace. So just going on what Grace said, that there's storytelling to it, to bringing people in the journey. On the flip side of it, Danica, you've also mentioned that we can't always be doing things ad hoc, and there has to be a system, also process. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I remember when adaptive management really started to get a foothold in the development space and started to, we started to hear a lot more about it, meetings, conferences, what have you. And it was quite often you'd hear people saying it's a flexible approach. It's a flexible approach, which seemed to give space for this idea that we could do things in an ad hoc way as long as we had evidence for it. But in fact, yes, it's flexible, but it's about being systematic in that way of like, how do we? I speak a lot to the fact of, yes, we can adapt our MEL systems, but what's the core of it is having this robust chain of evidence of the changes that we're contributing to along the way. And are those changes the change that our end-of-line beneficiaries, is that what they want to see? And so we have set in place processes where we have, very specific reflection points in the program. We have 140 staff in our program. It's hard to get 140 staff together on a routine basis. So we have these reflection points, but we're also we are in this case very flexible about how we convene people and bring people together. And everyone has a different understanding based on what they're working on about how change should happen and what we want to see. We have a common goal, but very diverse sort of understanding of how we should be going about doing it, depending if you're in a sort of a functional role or if you're in a very technical engineering type of role. And so coming back to like being very systemic, you'll have these reports that come in and people will be like, and we're going to do this because the government's created an opening and this is a really good opportunity and we should follow this. And so we have a set of criteria that we've put in place for these reflection points that we've asked all these very important questions around. There's lots of good ideas, but is this good for us? Is this good for what we need to be achieving? We need to be accountable to our donor, our client. We also need to be accountable to government of Timor-Leste at the same time. So we can have opportunities to shift and evolve and follow emerging pathways if they make sense for us. And we've created a set of criteria for the program to be able to answer these questions. So and every program will have different types of criteria, but in our case, are these aligned with government objectives? Is it aligned with our ways of working? Does it contribute to a specific, we focus on system strengthening. Does it contribute to system strengthening? Is there potential follow-up activity? We get a lot of great opportunities that come to us from government, but they're kind of sort of ad hoc, one-off activities that are great for relationship building, but then there's the trade-off of not being in a way that's sort of consistently contributing to the outcomes we need. So our MEL system is really built in these reflection points to be able to stocktake emerging opportunities and make sure that they're the right, even if they're good ideas, that they're the right ideas for us, so that we're not doing this sort of following what seems like a good idea only to run up to a dead end later on and not be able to leverage that result for something else.
Thank you. This is a question for anyone from the panel. When we talk about changing our systems or adapting it to what the government, our partner government, is asking, or they've had a change in their strategy, can you give us an example of what tools or how you've approached it, like adapting your program systems to align with the partner government priorities? Petra, did you want to go first? No.
Happy to, but I mean, that's definitely what's happened, like as other colleagues have stated in their programs where there's been change of leadership. So I think we also have to have some small level of flexibility where we can see that it's not necessarily aligned with the program, but the overall relationship and the influence of the particular stakeholder requires flexibility to support on activities that are not directly linked with the program, but where let's say the benefits of the relationship and the support of that stakeholder impact on where the program wants and needs to go. So a bit of political economy management, assessment and management there, but we can't always be as strict as required to follow only or only adjust and take on activities that fit wholly within our framework. So building the understanding as well as the what do you call it, the justification for being able to adapt, adjust, but then also see the broader picture of where it will benefit the program in the long run is really important. And I think that's also sometimes a challenge with for the MEL team, because then when asking what was the relevance and impact of activity A or B, um, uh, we also have to be very clear where it's what was the underlying intent in taking on or supporting activities. But on the other hand, making sure that the vast majority of our programming is very much aligned and focused on the outputs and outcomes that we've targeted.
Yeah, I also might add to that. When you talk about having to change, so when the new government of Timor-Leste came in 2023, they're basically like, we don't need support at the national level. All of your support should focus on municipal government and villages, except we have an entire outcome that's about supporting national government for policy and enabling environment. And so for the program team, they were like, oh, okay. All right, so they just all pivoted and started working at municipal level. And so we had to sort of, some people, you could be like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? We have this whole outcome and now we can't work on it. But we're like, this will change over time. So we had to rethink our strategy a bit about what type of information now do we need to also be collecting from our program teams. We have our MEL framework, we have a set of indicators that we're collecting data against, and we have various tools for analyzing progress. But what other information can we be collecting that we are then sort of using to work, to present to national government, because we still have a relationship with them, of course, to demonstrate that in fact we also need to be supporting them on certain things. And so that's how our MEL system shifted in that way, quite substantially actually, to add in all of these extra processes, which makes it sound like we added a lot of work. We didn't. It was more of like different types of additional questions here and there at certain points using certain different types of tools that we could then take, analyze, and then we help to present it back to the national government to say like, well, this is a gap. So we think that, this is what municipal governments are requesting. This is a problem with this regulation. There's some incoherence between this guideline and that guideline, and sort of influencing back up to the national level to talk about these are issues that you need to be addressing. So we still have an opportunity. We just had to strategically think about how we would work on it. And the MEL system had to, create space to be able to get additional information to accommodate that strategy shift.
And I guess on the other side of this is you're getting the information, but then how are we translating that information for the broader audience, which could be, in your instance, the people of Timor-Leste, people in PNG. Grace, you have mentioned about storytelling. I think the audience here would really like to hear more about how the data that is coming out of M&E systems, our different practices, how are we carving that out for the audience? And we recognize there's quite a few different stakeholder groups that we are working with. One is the client, and then internal programs as well as external. Grace, would you like to share some ideas and thoughts around that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So in terms of picking up those changes, those stories, we've gone from the MIS to now taking on folktale, and that's something new that we took on board to capture all of the stories that our program teams use. And we've been able to share that at our learning and reflection events with our governmental PNG partners, our churches, civil society, where we bring them together every 6 months and we share these stories with them. So these stories can be stories of change at the community level, how people are accessing health services, how women are accessing maternity wards, how services have been improved. We even have stories around policy influencing, what our partners are doing in terms of coming together and working towards a particular policy change. So it's been really interesting coming together, capturing those stories, and then being able to feed back to the stakeholders, and then we get their feedback. We have this like a most significant change in those sessions when they rate the stories and they see what they want to include in the progress reports to our client. So it's been a very interesting MEL system, that whole cycle of collecting data, sharing and providing feedback, and getting people's involvement.
Thank you. We will now slightly shift to the next theme of today's panel, which is on skills. I think a lot of people have an assumption that M&E is very technical, and so the people involved are technical people, would be data analysts, working with indicators. But that's not really the case, because we have M&E people all over the world, and there's no set course and degrees on M&E. So what skills do we need in this industry? And the question to the panel is, what are you looking for in the program, the MEL skills? I'll start with you, Danica.
I'm exactly that case, right? I have no background, like I have no training specifically in MEL. I did international law, conflict analysis as an education, worked in, did all of this post-conflict programming, et cetera, and over time sort of shifted into the MEL space as sort of opportunities to be part of sort of like the analysis and the problem solving and the understanding, what comes next. These spaces opened up. So for me, and I think it's different across different programs and different MEL teams and what have you, but so in the program I'm in right now, what I'm really looking for is people who have very good attention to detail. And I talk about robust chains of evidence. When we see reports come in from someone in one quarter, it says one thing, and being able to keep that in mind, and then the next report comes in and it's something entirely different, and being able to pick up on these small things, and also to be you get a ton of quantitative data in, and being able to understand what it's telling you, and also to be able to sort of very quickly understand what information is not correct, like it's out of context, what have you. So there's that attention to detail aspect of it. There's also being able to pick up trends and identify these stories, as Grace was telling about, as they emerge. So the sort of a bit of an analytical capacity, but at the same time also being able to have that big picture overview of the program. You really do need to know what's going on in the whole program at all times, and be able to sort of look backwards, but also look forwards. So the analytical capacity and problem-solving capacities are, these sort of softer skills are really critical for us in this program. I've worked on other programs where, the data analysis is, and the MIS is a much bigger technical skill focus. So it depends on the program and what your program needs in order to, manage adaptively, and also to be able to, manage just general program management. So.
Anyone online, Petra or Grace?
I think also in terms of our staff, people who are able to have the relationship, because you can have MEL technical skills and try to train others and coach and mentor them. But if you don't have the relationship with the next MEL officer or the next program staff, then it will be a waste of time. So being able to have those relationships, sometimes, not sometimes, we're now increasingly having to have facilitation skills to be able to do those learning and reflection workshops, bring people together, having to stand up in front of crowds and be confident, know what you're talking about, and provide guidance. So I'll stop there.
Can I just say, I agree fully with it, what's been said, and that we're very lucky. Our director for our MEL is Bethany Davis, and just her capacity to embrace complexity. So it's not that, accept that these programs are immensely complex, but instead of balking at that, really embracing that, and then progressing pathways to be able to express what we're doing and what our results clearly, but then combine that with a commons team that's able to then create evidence-based stories that are much more human relatable stories for a broader audience. But I think the challenge for MEL officers now, and the skill sets that are required are so much beyond just the technical MEL components. Thanks.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring a bit of the locally led lens here, because MEL, I mean, let alone here, it's hard to find that skill set. There's no certifications or such unless you're thrown into the role or come with some technical background. But in many parts of the world that we operate, our local staff do not have access to that training. They are interested in MEL, but oftentimes get scared because it seems and sounds technical. So what role do we play in training up or, bringing people in the journey? And also whose role is it? Is it on the leadership? Is it on the program? Is it on the client to give that space for MEL technical specialty and skills to grow?
If I can answer that, I think it's everyone's responsibility. As individuals, as leads, and as nationals, like you say, it's a really small space. There's no qualified programs here in PNG to be able to get someone certified in MEL. So I'll give an example. What we have done is we've employed a very recent graduate who had no skills at all, no experience. He's 2 years on the program now, and he can do data visualization. He's training our teams on the use of story collection, and even the MIS, working in the back end. So it's about identifying the talent and seeing how we can mentor and coach staff to be able to get to where we want to be. So it comes back to us to identify those talents.
Yeah, I agree with Grace. I think, being able to identify the talent or the possibility. Sometimes you find people who you think would be excellent, but they're just not interested. So, okay, that's fine. But, the team I work with at the moment, none of them have MEL backgrounds whatsoever. One was an accountant, and now she's our evaluation and learning office coordinator, and she's fantastic. She just really has this great mindset, and she really understands the problem solving, that thinking systematically, thinking in a complex way. So we set aside resources to, and now she's in several sort of online training courses to sort of help build her knowledge of broader MEL, practices, theories, etc. And other staff who are self-taught through YouTube videos on various different data management processes and tools. And so for me, people who are just really sort of take the initiative to learn and what have you, I always appreciate that the most, because it means that they're very interested and engaged. And we try to sort of, I'm an international staff on a development program in a MEL space. I won't be around that long, first of all. Second, I mean, it's increasingly locally led, right? My role should be nationalized in the next few years. And that's what I'm working towards as part of my role, is to identify the colleagues who can take on these sort of senior management roles in this very complex team and be able to go forward. So that's, yeah, I think, yeah, it's the talent identification and also just mentoring and fostering their growth and learning along the way.
Petra, did you want to add anything?
Just what we found interesting is in our interaction with government, sometimes we become so advanced in the MEL practices, and perhaps we sometimes make this assumption of competence that our partners are working off of the same level of, or not same level, but same frame of reference, and then getting caught up short because we were definitely not meeting this particular leader's expectations in terms of what that person felt how and what we should be reporting on. So just always be communicating and not assuming that people have the same frames of reference in terms of how we're developing and reporting on our results.
Thank you. We do have limited time, and so I'll go to the next theme of today's discussion, and that's about what's next in M&E. There's a big question on budget, and we work in a budget-constrained environment, but there's a lot of scrutiny on results. We are expected to deliver results, yet not given the budget on M&E to have all those systems and people on board. And here we are, sort of like balancing budget with delivering results, and that's a constant struggle. But for team leaders like yourself, Petra, you are faced with that sort of question at a leadership level. Can you share with us how you are managing that scenario?
I think in our case, very fortunate that DFAT had the foresight and I think based on experiences with the predecessor programs to Scala, that we under invested in M&E, and so we have a very clear set allocation, and so what we've actually found now is we've over budgeted for M&E, and so then being able to shift those resources to support other aspects of the program, but right from the start, making sure that M&E is resourced to what it sees its likely needs will be in projection per year, and making sure that that's set aside first. I just think it's been a pity that we've under invested in this area in the past, Farid.
Grace, how is the M&E budget looking on your side?
I think we've been very fortunate that at the onset of the design, we've been given that kind of that ceiling in between 7 and 10% of the program budget to do M&E. So I think it's a good percentage for the type of work that we are doing.
It's looking positive. It's not as grim as it sounds. Danica?
Yeah, Participa has a pretty decent MEL budget. The issue is I've always worked on projects that didn't have a MEL budget, so I learned how to do everything without a budget. And so now we have the operations manager coming being like, aren't you going to spend this money? And I'm like, I don't know how. That's the issue at the moment. And so, yeah, so now we're expanding and doing, putting more resources into the things like doing a lot more of the knowledge management and being able to assign resources into sort of more deep dives, various studies on things that we want to know a little bit more about based on the results that have emerged so far. And so, yeah, so for me, it's getting my head around having a budget, which is great. Yeah, but also having to not rely so heavily on systems that would let us do our MEL work without, you know, requiring money to do them. So in my the previous program I worked on, we kept calling it, instead of monitoring, we called it collaborative measurements, because we get all the teams to do the monitoring for us. And they were like, that's such a cop-out. They're like, where's the monitoring team? But, you know, when you're doing complex systems work, you can't just have a monitoring officer, right? Like, it's the people that are in the room and watching and observing and recording, you know, what are the discussions that are taking place. So while MEL budgets seem to, you know, have grown, at the same time, we don't have the same setup of how we used to do MEL, which was lots of field monitoring officers, and that's changed. So, you know, reconceptualizing how we're using these budgets to be, you know, for the learning and the knowledge management and being able to do the communication and advocacy with our partners and stuff as well.
Right, I think M&E is not just for the M&E team, but it's everyone's business. So we all have to chip in there. So a lot of investment goes on in M&E, as it sounds. And then what happens when the program comes to end? What do we do? Because there's been a lot of investments in MIS, investments in tools, people. Hopefully they move on to another program where they can utilize their skills. But there's all these data, there's all these really good stories of change. How are we transferring all this rich information and utilizing it in the countries and the communities that we're working in? So the question is to our panelists is, what are your recommendations in transferring all this information, or however much that we can, for the greater use once the program is completed and finished?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In the past, you know, you'll sort of hand over all of your sort of reports and what have you to your stakeholders and to your clients and be like, well, that's, you know, and hopefully they do something with it. But as part of the whole sort of locally led approach to development, one of the things that we've been doing on Participa is, and this is really a sort of a new process, sort of the last 12 months, is helping government build its own MEL systems, and we don't call them MEL systems. So, for example, at the municipal level with the Department of Public Works, for example, they didn't have a proper MIS system for managing roads contracts. So we've built that for them, and now we use that system for our reporting instead of having a standalone system for that. So helping sort of institutionalize our data collection MEL systems within the government's own systems as part of, first of all, system strengthening, but second, using that local evidence in our own reporting. So that's one way that we're trying to think longer term, instead of having our own sort of parallel systems all the time. So that's one way that but there's still so much more to do.
So I think fully agree that you actually have to be looking at this. So basically exiting from the start in terms of that aspect of ensuring knowledge transfer and the effective repository of information that's being generated. So part of the counterparts that we're working with include the directorates in charge of information management. And coincidentally, for instance, in Bapanas, they're developing their own AI repository and then AI system that's able to extract and utilize information from that. So So collaborating with them from this earlier on, rather than waiting for the final year of the program and then trying to figure out who's going to store the documents. Thanks.
Thank you, Petra. Grace.
Yeah, so the data that we largely collect comes from our partners. And it's a question of, I guess, data governance that they're also always thinking about, like what happens to the data. So we make sure that they have their own systems and processes in place and that they're giving us what is needed or relevant for the point in time. And we make sure that whatever stories we collect, we always share it back to them so that they have copies of those. In terms of the MIS, for example, say if we come to the end of the phase, then definitely this has to be given over to, handed over to the client, because at the end of the day, it's the systems that were, coming from the donor funds.
Thank you. I think we are getting close to time, and I've been asked to move to the next part of this panel. And as I said earlier, we wanted this to be a conversation. So the last segment of today's panel is Q&A, and we really want to hear from you and the challenges you're facing and the questions you may have for our panelists. So I'll open the floor for questions.
I'm just going to read, some people have put questions into here, so I'll read the ones that are in here, so you can also add more of your own or put your hand up. So let me just give you the first one. Monitoring and evaluation does not operate in a vacuum. It begins during or even before the project co-design phase. M&E is shared by the project design or plan, raising an important question. Who develops that design? If the design itself is not locally led or informed, then M&E cannot truly be localised either. Localising M&E is not simply about assigning responsibility to local staff. So what would you respond to that comment?
Let's say yes or no. There's understand that this is talking about substantial resources provided by whichever donor, in our case, DFAT, and there are reporting requirements and that are required for the donor, and we must fully accept that and incorporate that in our processes. At the same time, develop a framework that will be able to support local actors in their decision making as well, right? So it's not an either or. It's more how do you combine, and then the strength of the team combining between local capacity and international capacity is also important, because that provides a diversity of perspectives on what we're working on as well, which is also important. We as locals aren't always right either. And it's actually the value of being able to exchange ideas and perspectives, frameworks and experiences that really strengthen what we're trying to do and deliver at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think the issue is much more complex than that. I mean, we come in after, right? We come in after the designs are done, generally speaking. So we don't really have, I mean, we all have opinions, but we don't have a say in that process. But we didn't really dig into the locally led part of MEL either. And yes, I made a reference to the fact, eventually my role will be nationalized and what have you. It's bigger than national staff running the MEL thing. As I mentioned before, how do we slowly transform our MEL system to be very much about the local evidence that's being generated through local systems, and so we collect that. We collect evidence through the local systems rather than creating our own systems that then we feed back to government. So it's a process. and it's not an easy one, and it's not a it's you know it's sort of building up local systems and scaling down our sort of parallel system at the same time. But they're not they're not going at even rates, and it depends. Sometimes we work in countries where connectivity can be an issue. So sometimes when we want to get access information through local systems, we can't, for example, because that system might be down. So we also need to have backup plans, and it's quite a complex thing, but there is an end goal here, but the pace is not consistent, and it's up and down, and so we go.
And I just wanted to shed some of my experience in managing designs, perhaps not doing the design, but the client does have true intent of getting information from the local teams as well. So I think there's an assumption here in this question that it's not drafted by a local person, or the design was only done externally and then put into place in a country. So I think it is evolving, it is getting better, and it's more localized now. And the whole beauty about these adaptive M&E practices is to adapt and change and evolve. So it's not restricted to what was designed, but it evolves over time as we start implementing.
It's interesting to know that BSAP is starting to use AI in its MEL. So this one's to you, Grace. What do you think the opportunities are to use AI in MEL? What would be the pros and cons of doing this? And I guess others can comment too.
Thank you. So maybe I can start with the cons first, the limitations. That's a lot of back-end work involved in just making sure that AI is providing the right type of information, because it can tend to duplicate, and it has this very corporate kind of language, and it depends on what our teams are putting in the system. So it takes us a bit of time again to be able to go through the back end and make sure that it's the right type of information that's going in. In terms of, I think, the opportunities, it's a really good opportunity to have this central place or central location where everything is in the same place, one place, and that when people log in, they can see what the dashboards are like, what the summaries are like, how many men, how many women have been reached. Because normally people are so into collecting data or entering data, and they don't see the final product of how it looks like. So being able to link that and connect that, and give people that access to say, hey, all the reports that you entered, it's now coming together, and this is how it looks, with all of the dashboards and the rich information. And it just looks interesting and stunning, and it makes my heart skip a bit, seeing this colorful image up there. It just makes me so happy.
Yeah, we had our dashboard for our program go live last year, and yeah, I had to say, my heart skipped a beat. I was very excited about it. But yeah, and Grace and I and Petra, we've all had these conversations around, the amount of back-end work that's required to be able to trust what AI is giving you, because we're relying on. I get 90 reports every quarter. Guarantee you there's a lot of mistakes in there. So if I just put it into AI, I would be getting, it would be sending me off in the wrong direction all the time. So there's a lot of this back-end work that Grace talks about. On the other hand, after we clean all the data, then we have to analyze it, right? So, and at the same time, Farheen mentioned recently, like, what AI doesn't always pick up nuance, doesn't always pick up trends. So there's still the human element there. So I still see my role very much as like, working with my team, and we do a lot of the data cleaning, and then we still do the analysis. Where I see AI that can be really helpful is we work a lot with rubrics, right? Because we work on system strengthening, we don't have specific targets that we set. We sort of have a progressive rubric that and it's different variables that we measure against, and we've set out what change looks like at different levels of progress. And when we do the analysis of that, there's always that element of bias, and you want it to look good, and you want to show that you've made change. And I feel like AI can actually be really helpful, because you can put your analysis into AI, and you can ask it the specific questions, and I think it'll probably come back with a little more of an unbiased assessment of where you might be along that rubric and then you find a balance in there in some way. You could skew it by making your analysis look really fabulous, and it'll answer all your questions positively. But I think it gives us another voice, if you will. I use that term loosely, to sort of stock take, or not stock take, but to sort of check the analysis that we're doing and see if it makes a lot of sense, if it's coming up with something very different. Thank you.
There's another one here about whether DT Global has mechanisms to capture and share failure stories within the M&E system.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you look at reports and we talk about we've made so much progress here, and then we're like, we didn't, and you have to explain why you didn't make progress somewhere else. And we don't always call it failure, because I feel like when we say failure, it really makes the teams, like it undermines the morale of teams that are working really hard in very complex and dynamic environments. I mean, with the government change in Timor-Leste, it was a very challenging time. So to say, when we say we didn't make progress, we're not saying it was a failure, but, or if something didn't work, it just didn't work. I mean, and we're going to try something new, and we've learned from it. So if you look at reports, look for that type of wording, because to say something failed, I mean, unless you're talking about gross mismanagement and incompetence, which is very rare, I think to talk about failures is really not fair to the teams who put so much of their heart and their time into really trying to make these programs work.
Grace or Petra, did you want to add anything to that?
Just that I couldn't agree more. It's whether it's success or failure, is what have we learned, right, through that process, and so and so are we progressing from what we've learned to be able to do things better, or so it is. Particularly working across 10 provinces, each with very different contexts and starting points, right? And so what was easily done in one area was a massive failure in another area, but actually because the context had progressed further, that this particular process wasn't required, yet had been done anyway, and so. And so you could call it a failure, but actually, what did we learn from this? Thanks.
Farida, I just wanted to add one more, because the question did say what does DT Global have in place? There are some internal structures that we have in place. We've got the Development Effectiveness Unit, where we capture not just success and results, but also challenges that these programs face, from implementation to like the M&E through, stories of change or most significant change. We have access to a lot of this information, but we also have forums to talk it through. We've got community of practice, where MEL practitioners, as well as other implementers from all across our programs in Asia and Pacific, come together and we discuss, and there's specific topics. on almost a weekly basis. We have spotlight stories where we highlight stories, and those stories are not always positive. I mean, those stories are really talking about challenges and the learnings and how we overcome, or just telling us that this process didn't work, what could be done differently. And it's an open, safe space for all our programs and staff and corporate team to discuss and plan forward.
Can I just add, we've also got the Emerging Leadership Program, where a lot of lessons learned on particularly around managing and leading activities is then incorporated as input to more junior leaders in the programs.
Okay, we've got a question here in the audience, and we've got one more online, and then other people think about too if you'd have a question or comment you'd like to add.
Mine is not actually a question, but it's a comment. And Grace, I really liked what you said, and I'm not sure if I 100% caught it, but around, you know, bringing people together on an annual basis. And what I wrote down, even if it's not 100% correct, was let's do our annual reports as an event. Because people spend so much time writing these annual reports. They often just don't get read. They get read by, you know, a couple of people in DFAT. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we could just do them as an event instead, bring people together and share the stories, bring everybody along and listening to what the program's impact has had. So I've written it down, so I think that means it's going to happen. The other thing I really liked that you said, Denica, was around this set of criteria for decision making. And I thought that was really useful, what you decided that was right for your program. You know, is it in line with Government of Timor-Leste priorities? Is it in line with our ways of working? And yeah, I thought that was something that was really useful. So thank you very much for very practical suggestions.
Thanks. Can I respond to that? So just in terms of coming together and doing reports, we have a what we call a DACI session. So it's simply drop, add, keep, and improve. So we come together on a quarterly basis and see how we're going with our activities, and then just determine whether we should keep doing the activities, drop them, or add some more to it, and more work. So it's a really good process we have seen with our staff, that we're able to come together, learn together, and that's helping with the process of learning as well. We've hosted learning events. We call them sometimes talk stories. Another example we have is where our partners come to us and talk to us about the progress that they're making just before they do their progress reports. That's one partner in particular. If we could do this for all other partners, I think it will save that reviewing and feedback and going back and forth process.
There was one other comment that somebody made, a question about, you know, annual targets and overall objectives, but is there some kind of conflict between the people implementing the program and then gathering MEL data? What's the importance and use of independent perspectives in all of this?
I mean, that's always the question, right? And I really appreciate the fact that you know, MEL has evolved quite substantially, and for the past sort of like 6 or so years, I've been using a much more developmental evaluation approach where we are inside the team, but we're outside the team. So we're trying to bring this longer term evaluation perspective to the whole MEL process. And of course, then you have your periodic evaluation points as well. But I think, I mean, it's been quite some time since I worked on a program where we had specific targets because it's very difficult to be adaptive when you are focused on achieving a specific target. The blinders go on, you're like, yeah, we have to get there. And that's why I like this idea of the rubric, to sort of assess the progress. Is project emerging? Is project in place? Is it institutionalized? Progress, the change, is it institutionalized? And that process is actually, we do an initial analysis, and as I said, really being able to leverage AI to help us sort of make sure, reduce some of the bias in our analysis of that. But the results and all the evidence that's presented, we do that in a very participatory way together with DFAT colleagues. And also we do a lot of reflection on those results with our government counterparts, particularly at the municipal level, a little less at the national level. As I mentioned, national government's more interested in us working at subnational level at the moment. But using those sort of reflection and sort of not just internal reflection, but it's much more about partner reflection and looking at the results and validating the results along the way, I think it's a great practice for everyone, because we can all write lovely reports and say we did all of these things, and then who decides if it's good enough? And that's where those sort of the partner reflection and validation of results is really critical.
Would anybody else like to ask a question, make a comment?
This is partly a question or partly a comment. I was wondering whether your experiences in MEL actually have brought in any kind of qualitative data as a main source of information for your monitoring and evaluation purposes. In our project, for example, we've almost exclusively used qual to build up on, I think Grace was hinting on story building and storytelling, and pretty much everything we've done for our MEL reporting has been narratives, which we've confirmed with the communities, which both created ownership, but at the same time validation for our findings and actually direction. I would like to invite my colleague, Yuyen, to re-articulate what I've said, because she is actually our MEL person. Mel, Yuyen, please. Could you tell them something about how we did it in terms of the qualitative aspects of the research?
You're very good. I've been volunteered. Yeah, so our project with Anthony is actually entitled Inclusive Value Chain Development, covering vegetable and also coffee in southern Philippines and also in central Philippines, that's in the Visayas. But the one we presented yesterday was on coffee. So I am part of the MEL component. So we also used MEL as a framework, but then we added and that's integrated. So we have it integrated MEL. So the purpose, because it's an HR funded project, so part of the, it has a research component. So the research component is more on the MEL. So yeah, so we're now focusing on the tools that we used. And we have a transdisciplinary group, so many of our colleagues are from the economics because it's value chain development. So when we say value chain development, it's really focused on income. So it's more on quantitative data, changes on income over time from point A to B based on the interventions of the project. But for this one, because we are working in a coffee, it's a commodity. We can look at it as just commodity. But if we go to the ground, really understand the context and all, it can be very complex. There are a lot of factors influencing the conditions of the farmers, why they stay as they are. They are for the context. The province is the major producer of coffee in the Philippines, and yet, they are still there. So why? So to understand the context, we used more of qualitative data. So we have of course, the usual farming systems analysis, the rapid marketing appraisal, but then we also used, how do I say, we adapted methods as well. So instead of just looking on their farming systems, their socioeconomic data, we also go beyond that. So what are their aspirations in life based on their coffee farming? And so when we do the MEL, there's no fixed tools or methods that we used, but then we have several approaches. And but then it's not that we use any tools just to do it, but there's a purpose of using it because we want to capture the different nuances involving their condition and all. So over time, so that's one. We used Pangandoy, so that's aspiration to look beyond their income and how that influences their, their condition and also the other factors. And that enabled us to identify other equally important dimensions like health, like education, etc. And now we are ending the project. So Grace mentioned a while ago about storytelling. Most significant changes, but for this one, we will be using outcome harvesting so that we will be able to, from the farmers, maybe come up with outcome stories. So these are really narrative-based, story-based, and so we use different tools and methods. So there's no specific approach or, because MEL is very reflexive. But then of course I get the point of Danica that there's an end goal, but the process can be very complex. So we have to embrace that complexity.
If I may just add one more sentence. So oftentimes with qualitative information, it's difficult to validate. There's a tendency to be subjective, etc. There's a concept of trustworthiness to evaluate the criteria, the robustness of qualitative data. And it looks at credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So hopefully looking into Lincoln and Guba's concept of trustworthiness might be useful for everyone. Thank you.
I think what's useful also about what you just raised, right, is the importance of also kind of broader perspectives, theory in evaluation as well. So not only the technical skills that we can learn on the job, but the different theoretical perspectives we can take in analysing data. And also I think greater linkage to the professional associations is really important, and they provide useful frameworks like competency frameworks to help us understand the kinds of sets of skills. You mentioned relationship skills, interpersonal skills, data analysis, facilitation, all of these different sets of skills. Any other comments or questions from people? I think we're getting close. Where are we now? It's like, oh, yeah. We're actually on time, so I'm going to just first of all say what a wonderful lineup. Thanks so much for sharing all of your expertise and experiences.
Thank you to our online panelists, Petra and Grace and Danica, for your rich insights. We've definitely learned M&E is not all about measurements, but meaningful change. And thank you to the participants here. Thank you.